Welcome to the Criminal Department, where we delve deep into the lives and minds of some of history's most infamous criminals. In today's episode, we're diving into the disturbing life of Jerome Henry Brudos, a man whose crimes shook the Pacific Northwest during the 1960s. Known as the Lust Killer, Brudos had an insatiable obsession with women's shoes and lingerie that spiraled into something much darker. As we unravel this chilling case, prepare yourself for a journey through Brudos' twisted mind, his violent crimes, and his eventual downfall. Viewer discretion is strongly advised, as the following content contains details of disturbing and violent acts. Jerome Henry Brudos was born on January 31, 1939, in Webster, South Dakota, the younger of two sons. From a very young age, Brudos' life was marked by rejection and emotional abuse. His mother, Eileen, had long desired a daughter and made no effort to hide her disappointment that Jerome was a boy. This resentment created a toxic family environment, and as Brudos grew up, he was often the target of his mother's anger. She belittled and shamed him, fueling feelings of inadequacy that would manifest later in life. By the age of 5, Brudos' behavior began to show early signs of deviancy. He developed an unusual fascination with women's shoes. One day, he found a pair of high-heeled shoes in a local junkyard, and though he was young, his attachment to the shoes was deeply concerning. When his mother discovered him wearing the heels, she berated him and burned the shoes, believing this would correct his behavior. However, this only intensified his obsession, planting the seeds for his future crimes. As Brudos entered adolescence, his fixation on women's footwear grew alongside other troubling behaviors. By his early teenage years, he had begun breaking into neighbors' homes to steal women's shoes and undergarments, an escalation that indicated his emerging criminal tendencies. In his late teens, Brudos' behavior turned even more dangerous. At the age of 17, he abducted a woman, forced her to undress, and took photographs of her. This was his first known attempt at acting out his violent fantasies. For this crime, he was briefly institutionalized and diagnosed with schizophrenia, though the full extent of his psychological issues went unaddressed. After a short stay, Brudos was released, and instead of receiving the psychiatric help he desperately needed, he was allowed to return to society. Despite his troubled past, Brudos managed to finish high school and enlist in the U.S. Army. However, his time in the military was short-lived. He frequently spoke of disturbing fantasies, which led to his discharge. Once out of the Army, Brudos returned to Oregon, where he married and started a family. He appeared to be living a relatively normal life, but beneath the surface, his dark fantasies were festering. It was during this time that his crimes would escalate beyond theft and voyeurism into something far more sinister. By 1968, Brudos' perverse desires had fully transformed into violence. His first known murder occurred in January of that year. Linda Slauson, a 19-year-old door-to-door or encyclopedia saleswoman, knocked on Brudos' door. Brudos lured her into his garage, claiming he was interested in purchasing some books. Once inside, he bludgeoned her to death. What happened next was a grotesque display of Brudos' compulsions. After killing Slauson, Brudos dressed her body in lingerie and high heels, items he had stolen from other women. He then took photographs of her lifeless body before cutting off one of her feet to use as a model for wearing his collection of stolen shoes. Brudos disposed of her body by dumping it in the Willamette River, beginning what would become a horrifying pattern of murder and mutilation. Over the next year, Brudos continued his killing spree, targeting young women who fit his ideal image. His next victim was 23-year-old Jen Susan Whitney. In November 1968, Whitney's car broke down along Interstate 5, and Brudos offered to help instead of assisting her. He strangled her to death in his car. Brudos brought Whitney's body back to his home, where he posed her, took photographs, and engaged in further mutilation. This time, he kept her body for several days before eventually dumping it in a river. In March 1969, Brudos struck again. This time, his victim was Karen Sprinker, an 18-year-old college student who was abducted from a parking garage. Brudos forced her to wear women's underwear and took photographs of her before strangling her. Like his previous victims, Sprinker's body was dumped in the river after he had mutilated it. His final known victim was 22-year-old Linda Sala, who was abducted in April 1969. Her fate was no different from the others. After murdering her, Brudos disfigured her body and disposed of it in the same manner as his previous victims. Brudos might have continued his spree had it not been for a series of mistakes. After dumping his victims' bodies in local rivers, he left evidence that would eventually lead to his arrest. Fishermen discovered 2 of the bodies, weighed down with car parts which were traced back to Brudos. Additionally, a witness reported seeing Brudos near the scene of one of the abductions. Police set up a sting operation using a female decoy to lure Brudos into a trap. When Brudos took the bait, investigators obtained enough evidence to search his home. What they found inside his garage was nothing short of horrifying. In addition to his collection of women's shoes and underwear, they discovered photographs of his victims, as well as some of the severed body parts he had kept as trophies. In May 1969, Jerome Brudos was arrested and charged with the murders of his 4 known victims. Under interrogation, he confessed in chilling detail, showing no remorse for his actions. Brudos' trial was a media sensation, with the public horrified by the brutal nature of his crimes. During the trial, the defense attempted to argue that Brudos was legally insane, citing his long history of mental illness and deviant behavior. However, the prosecution argued that Brudos was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. The jury agreed. In June 1969, Jerome Brudos was convicted of 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His 4th victim, Linda Slauson, was not included in the charges as her body was never recovered. Brudos spent the rest of his life in the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he became known as a quiet and reclusive inmate. He passed the time by writing letters to shoe companies, requesting catalogs, and continuing to indulge in his obsession with women's footwear. Brudos never expressed any remorse for his crimes, nor did he acknowledge the pain and suffering he had caused his victims and their families. On March 28, 2006, Brudos died of liver cancer while still incarcerated. He was 67 years old. The case of Jerome Brudos remains one of the most disturbing in American criminal history. His brutal murders and grotesque obsession with women's clothing and shoes make him a unique figure among serial killers. Brudos' case also sheds light on the dangers of untreated mental illness and the consequences of ignoring early warning signs of deviant behavior. His story serves as a chilling reminder that beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives can lurk unimaginable darkness. That's the story of Jerome Brudos, the lust killer whose twisted mind and unspeakable actions forever scarred the Pacific Northwest. If you found this story fascinating, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the minds of history's most infamous criminals.